Investing on P2P lending marketplaces like Mintos or Peerberry is always connected to a certain level of risk. Most risks can be mitigated at the loan originator level, meaning the lending company is constantly monitoring the industry and following local regulations to ensure sustainable lending practices. Despite a safety blanket in the form of a buyback obligation offered on various platforms, the level of risk varies from lender to lender. In a perfect world, you can rely on the lender to fulfill its obligations to investors and repay the loan as well as the interest. However, we don't live in a perfect world, otherwise we would not see over 129 million euro of investors' funds locked up on Mintos. That's why it's so crucial to have some sort of understanding of the risks you are taking on when investing in the loan portfolios of those loan originators. Platforms earn a commission from loan originators, so their primary goal is to provide as much funding as possible within their limits to maximize revenue. Naturally, this creates a conflict of interest, which is why it's a good idea to think for yourself and evaluate the risk on your own. This requires some sort of understanding of the lender's business model and the market risk in a specific region. And that's where our two new data hubs come into play. Specifically, our lender risk and country risk pages designed for investors seeking to invest in loan originators across various marketplaces rather than business loans on crowd lending platforms. So let's now go over the data that you can use to enhance your understanding of the risks that you are taking. First, let's cover the lender data, which shows two key financial ratios over the past 2 years. One key ratio is the equity to asset ratio, which indicates the percentage of the company's assets, including the loan portfolio, that are funded by shareholders' equity rather than debt. The higher the ratio, the larger the equity cushion, which helps absorb losses should the lender face financial difficulties. The lower the ratio, the less buffer to absorb losses. As you can see on the screen, this is the equity to asset ratio risk scale, which shows you the level of risk based on the calculated ratio, which is retrieved from the lender's financial statements. For lenders who publish their annual statements regularly, you can also evaluate the changes in the ratios compared to the previous year and determine whether the company is still well capitalized. The second ratio that we are calculating is the debt to equity ratio, which is a good indicator of the leverage that a lender is willing to take. A low ratio indicates that the lender is not heavily reliant on borrowed funds, which are often the funds provided by P2P investors. A high ratio indicates substantial leverage, which increases the risk. Should the lender lose its funding source, it could become quite a big problem. Again, on this scale, you can see the risk associated with higher or lower ratios. You can also review the yearly trend and see whether the risk have decreased or increased. To give you a quick overview of the risks, we have used a color scheme. Blue or green stands for lower risk, yellow and orange represents moderate risk, and red represents higher risk. If you click on the lender, you will be able to review additional information such as the return on equity ratio, which measures how efficiently a lender uses its equity to generate profits. You will find more information about it on the dedicated lender risk page. Sometimes the return on equity ratio can be distorted, so it's good to open up the financial report and review the profits and equity positions directly in the report, which you will find by clicking on the link in the expanded lender view. For your convenience, we have also added a check mark for reports that are audited, as well as the information about where you can invest in a dedicated lender. By default, we are sorting all lenders alphabetically. Feel free, however, to change the sorting by clicking on the column titles, which enable you to sort based on the ratios. That way you can quickly find the most capitalized lenders with the lowest leverage, if that's something you are interested in. By clicking on the invest button, you will get redirected to the platform where you can invest in loans from a specific lender. Note that the loan availability varies on every platform. Unfortunately, we cannot display the offered interest rate and loan availability. You will need to determine this on your own. Lenders who stop raising funds from specific platforms will be removed. That way we keep the list more relevant. We'll also be updating the information based on the latest available financial report published by the lender. If we cannot locate a report, then you will know that this data is not publicly available. If specific data is not available, it may be because the lender either doesn't publish it or has just launched recently, which means it cannot provide relevant financial information. This has a somewhat negative impact on the risk level. The risk decreases for lenders who publish solid and audited financial information. Another aspect to consider is that we also review the statements of financial groups. You will be able to distinguish them by their name, which always includes the word group. This means that financials from individual companies within the group are not available. Instead, you can only review the group level financials, which can be distorted or deceiving depending on how you look at them. If you are investing in a loan book from a specific lender that is part of a group but is not covered by a group guarantee, then the group level financials will not tell you much about the risk that you are taking on. Additionally, it's also essential to understand how raised funds are being used. For example, the Una Financial Group raises funds via its entity in Singapore, which are then being used to finance the lending startup in Uzbekistan. There are a few entities that follow a similar structure, one being the newly introduced lender on Esketit, MDI Finance, which raises funds through Latvia, which are then being used in Sri Lanka. A similar structure is also used with Abele Finance on Nectar, which is used in the Philippines. If you're planning to invest in those lenders, it's good to be aware of how those funds are being used, since the underlying loans are used in a different market as listed next to the funding entity. Some of the lenders don't present good financials. Whether an investment is worth it will depend on the offered interest rate as well as the underlying guarantees, which could be a group guarantee, as is the case on Peerberry. Still, if you can, you don't want to rely on any group guarantees, as the recovery of funds can take several years, depending on the amounts, during which you most likely will not earn any interest on your investment. This decreases your annual yield, so aim for the best risk and return ratio instead. So this page gives you a quick overview of the risks based on published financial statements. Apart from the economic performance, we also need to consider the country risk, which leads us to the second page. The country risk hub comes with similar sorting features. You can either sort the countries alphabetically or sort based on the highest and lowest data points for each risk variable. The goal of this page is to inform you about the risks associated with investing in a specific country. To determine this, we are sourcing data points related to the rule of law, currency risk, inflation rate, corruption index, credit rating regulation, NPL ratios for banks, access to credit, and internet penetration. All of those variables have an impact on the risk, especially for consumer loan portfolios. If you want to learn more about how every category impacts the risk, I suggest reading the information on the page, as it can be a bit mundane to cover it in this video. The goal of this page is to give you an idea of the perceived risk in a specific market. Ideally, this is reflected in the return on your investment. So for example, investing in a consumer loan portfolio in a low-risk regulated country with no currency risk should yield lower returns as opposed to investing in one of the high-risk countries with high currency risk, low credit ratings, and low rule of law. Investing in those countries can only be justified by either higher returns or a proven group guarantee that can quickly be applied to refund investors should things go sideways. One note I would like to mention is that some of this data is sourced from sources dating back to 2023 and 2024. It's not always easy to find reputable information specifically relevant for P2P investors. While we will update this data regularly, keep in mind that the accuracy of specific data may fluctuate. Using the data presented on our website will help you better understand the risk associated with investing in consumer loans. Sometimes taking a high risk may be worth it, other times it just doesn't make much sense. The best course of action is to use the data and apply it to your personal risk profile while also considering the features and track record of a particular platform. One more thing before we wrap up, note that all this information is historical data. This means that it does not guarantee future outcomes. P2P lending remains a risky investment. You can manage your risk by the level of exposure and diversification that matches your risk profile. If you found this video helpful, do me a favor, hit the like button and subscribe to not miss out on future updates. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you next one.